Oh yeah, that's definitely staying in the video. Are you a writer? Are you finally writing a book that you started over a year and a half ago? Do you struggle to stay motivated on your projects? Why not try recording yourself talking about your work? In early 2021, I started writing a story that would later be called The Warlock of Kilbyrne. I'd just finished writing my dissertation and was bored at a train station. I combined a couple of ideas that were already floating around in my head and just slammed some words down on a blank Word document. I kept working on The Warlock of Kilbyrne for most of that year, but it eventually fell away from me after I started working full-time. And by the time I had the free time required to work on it again, I'd changed what I wanted the story to be so much that I didn't really fancy rewriting the whole thing from scratch. Then, finally, I needed something to submit to the application for an MA Creative Writing course, and since I'd previously used it for an assessment during my undergraduate, I dusted off The Warlock of Kilbyrne and started reworking the opening. And once that was over, I realised that I still really loved my ideas for Warlock of Kilbyrne, and that I finally wanted to finish it. But, as with every other project I've started in the last 5 years, I didn't want to get halfway through before losing my motivation. And that's where this video came along. I wanted to do some kind of video diary for my work for a while now, basically since my first failed attempt at a NaNoWriMo entry, which was about 2018. I've yet to finish a NaNoWriMo entry, so here I am. But what actually is the Warlock of Kilbyrne? That probably would have been the best place to start. As I mentioned before, I started the Warlock of Kilbyrne while waiting for a train. The story is kind of a mess, but it's my mess. The book tells the story of Gauntthrace, a young man from an industrial-era city of Kilbyrne in the theocratic Empire of Alcinia. After a sudden tragedy, he ends up permanently bonded to a demon named Shadow. During an attempt to overthrow the Empire and the Inquisition that keeps them in power, he ends up being thrown from his world into ours. Or at least the fantasy version of ours. Once there, he has to deal with getting a job and making friends, and even starts attending university, alongside fighting encroaching monsters and evading the members of the Inquisition who follow him over here. That's the vague summary, and that's most of what I actually have right now. I haven't planned out the story beforehand, because I think that's boring. As of the time of writing this script, I've just finished the 3rd chapter, so I'll dive a little more into what happens in those opening 3 chapters. The first introduces us to Gaunt and the world of Kilbyrne. At the start of the story, Gaunt's 17, and is the son of just one of the worst people imaginable. His dad's job is that of a line warden. Think middle manager with a touch more prison snitch. His job involves keeping tabs on co-workers and reporting them if they break the somewhat arbitrary laws that the Inquisition and the Empire put in place. Gaunt and his dad don't get along, and he spends most of his free time learning to fight from his mother. Then, in the inciting incident for the story, Gaunt's home, a large apartment building, is destroyed by a sudden explosion. He wakes up in the rubble to find a mysterious voice in his head belonging to a demon called the Shadow Lord, which is almost immediately shortened to Shadow. Shadow reveals that they were drawn here by someone attempting to summon their demonic rival, and that rival was the one who destroyed the building. Shadow explains that they bonded with Gaunt effectively just to hide from the Inquisition, but unfortunately, because they were injured, if they were to now leave Gaunt's body, they would be destroyed in the process. Gaunt is unwilling to force this demon to destroy themselves, and so the two form a mutual partnership. And that's about where the first chapter ends. In the second, after spending a night in an alleyway, Gaunt heads to the city market to try and get some food. There's a bit of, banter between the two, where Gaunt can't quite get the hang of communicating with Shadow, because he has to, think things in his head, but not think them to the other person that's in their head. If this isn't making sense, that's kind of the joke in the story. When he actually gets to the market, Gaunt finds that the market has been postponed because they are holding a live execution, not uncommon in Kilbyrne, but uncommon enough that it doesn't happen every day. It turns out that the person being executed is the last person his father reported before his father's death the night before. That's really clumsily phrased, but it makes more sense in the story. And Gaunt knows this person's innocent. He knows they were stealing food to survive as opposed to stealing food because they wanted to destroy the Empire. And on basically an impulse, attempts to stop this person being executed. It's also where we introduce one of the first one of the first story details I actually came up with, which was the idea that Shadow has the ability to summon a mask that conceals Gaunt's identity. It's not described in this chapter, but it's kind of a featureless purple mask. That was literally the first thing I came up with for the story. Gaunt manages to use the fact that he's trained quite well in combat to defeat the guards, and then flees, dragging them away from the scene. They manage to escape, and at the end of that, that's the end of chapter 2. And then at the start of the next chapter, we time skip forward a year, and we find Gaunt perched on a gargoyle on the Kilbyrne City Clock Tower, which is built into their equivalent to the Houses of Parliament. So think like Elizabeth Tower, but with gargoyles. It's overlooking the private offices and residence of the High Councillor, and they are celebrating the crowning of a new Lord Inquisitor, which is not the leader of the Inquisition. It's like the second rank down. Think, Lord. There's the one above that's like the Pope, and then you've got like the Cardinal. That's the one. Gaunt is now in the time skip. Gaunt started working with other resistance types, and has been sent to surveil. He's on surveillance for the party, but he's also another resistance member has bet that he won't, and these are the exact words, crash the party, because as previously established, Gaunt is incredibly impulsive. He crashes the party, and he does this in the most needlessly dramatic way possible by jumping off of the gargoyle, smashing through the stained glass window. So once he crashes through the ceiling, Gaunt meets the Kilbyrne High Councillor, who is a man named Orange Trammell, whose sole character trait is that he's angry, and the much more calm and collected Lord Inquisitor Duncan Blythe, who is going to go on to serve as basically the main antagonist for the whole story. And within only literally a few lines of dialogue exchanged between the three of them, Gaunt has the High Councillor screaming in rage and ends up having to fight several of the guards in the party. After defeating the guards, Gaunt has to flee across the roof of the council chamber, and he gets there by jumping out of another window. But he's a little distracted watching behind him, which means he doesn't see the invisible magical wall. It's really hard to explain because you're explaining two different spells in a basically soft magic system. But if you imagine that there is I'm actually going to get a physical prop to do this. So Gaunt is running along this roof ridge here. And the Inquisitor who's stopping him is here. And they have cast a invisible wall, or a wall that they have then hidden behind another illusion that looks like the night sky. So Gaunt doesn't see this until he smashes into it, face first. And then he is trapped on this roof ridge because as he glances back, we see... This is a really effective way to explain action scenes. We see Blythe sort of jump out the window behind him and corner him. And Blythe taunts him about having nowhere left to run, to which Gaunt jumps off the side of the roof and into the river. And if you've ever... all of those dice just went on the floor. If you've ever heard any stories about rivers in industrial era cities, you know you should not jump into them. And if you do, what you especially shouldn't do is open your eyes. Because Gordon is then greeted by the kind of pain that you could only get if you're the kind of idiot who accidentally sprays themselves in the eye with aftershave one time and then remembers it for years later. I sprayed myself in the eye with aftershave like 5 years ago, and I still distinctly remember that burning pain. So then Gaunt panics because he's underwater with burning eyes, has just screamed in pain and lost the last of his oxygen, at which point Shadow, who is permanently living inside Gaunt's head, takes control of his arm and does weird magic shit and creates a oxygen bubble around him. And Gaunt is left at the bottom of this river. The two have a quick discussion of their strategy for what to do next, and Shadow says that he wants to basically scry, if you know the D&D spell scrying, scry on the High Counselor to see what his plan is moving forward. And Gaunt is kind of depressed about that, because it means he has to spend the night in the sewer, which is not a place anyone wants to spend their night. But Shadow points out that there's these things in Kilbyrne called scurry holes, which were built by a criminal no one knows about, who is forgotten to time, but everyone has heard of through word of mouth. That are basically little chamber with a concrete slab in them that's clean and like watertight, so you can stay there and the guards can't find you. And so Gaunt hides in this scurry hole in the sewer, and that's where that chapter ends. I know vaguely what's going to happen in Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is going to be told in, instead of first person, which is what the previous chapters have been, it'll be told in third person and will follow... it'll initially follow Blythe and Trammell while they sort of discuss what's going to happen next. But eventually it just transitions to following Blythe as he kind of has to work on this investigation of tracking down Gaunt after he falls in the river. And that's about all I know. As I alluded to earlier, possibly, done in a line that might have gotten cut, I don't like planning ahead. I've tried it. That's actually one of the things that killed the first draft of Warlock of Kilbyrne, was me planning it during my lunch breaks, and then I got very bored of the planning stage, and hadn't made any progress on the writing stage. And then I ran out of time, my life went to hell, and it got shelved. I vaguely know how long I want the book to be, ballparking somewhere between 80 and 100,000 words, so not super long, not very short either. I'm just not very good at planning ahead, as this video will evidence, because half of it will be very well spoken, and then suddenly I'll drop the act entirely because I didn't write a very good script. But I'm planning to record myself regularly doing this. Regularly may become very ironic very quickly. I want to film one of these every week. It's right now very early on Friday morning, so I will... I forgot what day it is. I will very early on Friday morning, so I will probably record the next one of these very early on Friday morning. If I write every day, as I'm planning to, I should probably be looking at talking about 5 chapters every episode. I've only done 3 for this because I just wanted to get this first one out, or at least first one recorded. By the time this video is uploaded, I may well have written more, but planning to write 5-ish chapters a week. And if I actually manage to stick to that, then I will hopefully have finished by the end of the year. I don't know how long each chapter is going to be. The current chapters are all quite long. They will probably get shorter as I run out of ideas, as always happens with my work. But that's everything I've got so far, everything I know about what I'm going to do so far,
and I've hopefully not made too much of a twat of myself. But that is the end of the video. So hopefully I'll see you next week.